Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am Holly Peipenberg from the Pulitzer Center. We'll get started here in a few moments with today's conversation, but while we're waiting for folks to tune in, please let us know in the chat where you're tuning in from. Um, I'll start. I'm in Maryland, outside DC. I'm looking forward to helping moderate this conversation today. For those who have not joined us before, the Pulitzer Center is a nonprofit journalism and education organization based in Washington, D.C. We support more than 170 reporting projects each year on global and local issues. On our website, you can take a look under our reporting issues page where we bring together this work by themes, including racial justice, environment and climate change, and public health, among many others. We have developed a strong university program connecting journalists with college campuses in person and now virtually, of course, to engage with students. We also award reporting fellowships every year to students from our now more than 35 university partners. On the K-12 education front, we reach thousands of students and educators via class visits, online sessions, and professional development workshops. We also organize public events and webinars like this one today. You can find all the reporting and education resources on our website at pulitzercenter.org. Just a few logistics before we begin. We'll start the conversation with our guests, and then we'll have time for questions from the audience. You'll see a Q&A icon probably at the bottom of your screen. You can begin adding your questions at any time throughout the remarks. Please go ahead and submit your question as soon as something comes to mind. There's also a chat icon on your screen. We'd appreciate it if you'd use the chat box for specific technology issues, but do keep sharing where you're tuning in from. All attendees are muted, but if you can't hear us, do let us know in that chat box. And we want you to know that we are recording this session to post online for others who cannot join us today. We'll be live tweeting this event, and you can join the conversation through the hashtag Great Lakes Climate Change. And one final logistic note, please remember to stay online once the session ends to participate in a brief survey. We'd really appreciate it. Now, I'd like to briefly introduce today's guests. Could you all give a little wave or hello? And we've got the names on screen, so I don't feel like I have to say too much, but starting at the top, Kimberly Knott, could you say hello? And Sandra Svoboda.
Hi, nice to be here.
Tony Briscoe.
Hey everybody, thank you for joining us.
Kari Lydersen.
Hi, thank you.
Ogimaa Peltier.
Good evening, everyone.
So good to see all of you. And it's really an honor to just meet some of you. I almost said in person, but virtually, it still feels wonderful. And I'm so excited to learn more about your work, though I've already read a lot. I think it's great to finally be able to ask you more. And I think we'll start there if that's okay. I think my first question is going to go to the journalists in this space. I'd just like to learn a little bit more. And I think maybe for our audience members who haven't read your reporting, just learn a little bit more about where you reported and if there were major themes or takeaways from your projects, you could just share those. Sandra, would you like to start?
Sure, I'm unmuted, so can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm Sandra Svoboda. I'm the program director of Great Lakes Now. We are an initiative of Detroit Public Television. We launched a monthly TV show 2 years ago in April that airs on dozens of PBS channels around the Midwest. And we look at all, not just environmental issues of the Great Lakes, although that's a large part of what we do on the program, but we also kind of get into, we try to be a little bit more fun where we can, because we do have so many serious issues. And so we do 3 segments in each show. We are regional, we consider Canada our audience as much as the United States, and really focusing as a regional show is really different and really exciting. The project we collaborated on was From Rust to Resilience, and you're going to hear from one of the collaborators in just a moment. That was a project we did in April of 2020 that there was co-publishing from our nonprofit media outlets that came in with support from the Pulitzer Center. So thank you for allowing us to do that project. Great Lakes Now is not just the show, though. We have a website, greatlakesnow.org, where we have digital content. We carry the Associated Press so that we can be really current on breaking news around the lakes. We have regular contributors, freelancers from around the basin. And then we really have a growing number of partnerships in content sharing. We do everything from co-reporting to just reposting stories. So we can get in a little more of that for the journalists in the crowd of what the program was like. Great Lakes Now also does engagement like this. We've taken to Facebook watch parties in the pandemic. And then we have an educational component because of course we're PBS, so we do it all, not just the news, but that piece as well. So we have a collection of lesson plans on our site. We have 3 virtual field trips, and we're always looking to do more about that. And so that's a big introduction to what we do at Great Lakes Now. I will turn that over to who's next, Kari. I think that. Sorry, Tony. I'm gonna call on Kari because she was part of the project that I mentioned.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm Kari Lydersen. I collaborated on the Rest to Resilience project, and I did a story specifically with the NCIA, the nonprofit news outlet based at University of Minnesota. And mine was kind of like an overview piece. So I actually live in Chicago, and I've reported on Great Lakes issues for a long time. So I was drawing in part on travel reporting that I'd gotten to do in the past. But my piece was kind of looking at the theme of Rest to Resilience and the ways that environmental issues and impacts of climate change in the Great Lakes can be mitigated and addressed in ways that are mutually beneficial, have economic benefits, how it doesn't have to be trade-offs between jobs and economic development and the environment, and the impacts of industry and building our economy in the Rust Belt did a lot to hurt and destroy parts of the Great Lakes ecosystem, but rebuilding that ecosystem can actually be done in ways that benefits the economy and local industries, and likewise preparing for climate change and trying to mitigate climate change can be done in ways with all kinds of side benefits. So, just for an example, like trying to curb the nutrient blooms and the harmful algae in Lake Erie and other Great Lakes, ways that you can do that, solutions with buffers and reforming agricultural practices can also have all kinds of other economic and farming and wildlife benefits. Same with revamping infrastructure to survive the impacts of climate change and to rebuild after damage from the high lake water levels. That can be done in ways that create resiliency for the future and that create jobs. And there's many more examples. So I'm happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Kari. Tony, Kari mentioned algal blooms, and that reminded me of some of the work you did. So would you like to tell us more?
No, absolutely. It's that's the hard part, I guess, with this topic, is there's so many different areas, I guess, that you could kind of start in, and that's what we tried to do while I was at the Chicago Tribune. I'm with ProPublica now, but we had our series Great Lakes High Stakes, and we really just kind of wanted to take a look at what a tremendous resource we have in the Great Lakes. It's the largest system of fresh water on the planet, above ground. In our own backyard, but and while it's being impacted by climate change, each of them are kind of changing in different ways or to different degrees, because they're also unique, and they have different characteristics and setups. So you see obviously the harmful algal blooms, these really big bacteria outbreaks that generate certain toxins in Lake Erie. You have these crazy fluctuations that we've seen, 6 feet of lake level rise from 2013 to 2020 in Lakes Huron and Michigan. You've had extreme levels of, ice cover and ice loss on Lake Superior and many of the other lakes. And so while they're all responding to these big, forces, they're all being exposed to, climate change, but they're all it's to different degrees because they all are so different. And so what we really wanted to do is just really highlight these special characteristics that makes each lake and each of the towns, that border these lakes, what makes them special and how are they, changing as we experience global warming and human activity too. So, I mean, just looking at, ways that people are adapting. And I think that Ogimaa Peltier could probably speak to this too, but it was just really interesting. One of the observations of looking at how great of a fishing ground Lake Huron was, and now many communities that have traditionally relied on fishing are now turning to fish farming, or ice louse on Lake Superior, where you have these folks who call themselves the Northland and have typically gone ice fishing, or have visited ice caves and such like that, and now they're turning to snowshoe tours as we're getting heavier precipitation and more lake effect snow because the lakes aren't covered with ice. So just kind of observing those kind of things and seeing how people are adjusting has been, I think, the biggest takeaway in our series.
Thanks, Tony. And I think that is kind of a natural place for Ogimaa Peltier to come in and talk about. For those who may not know, Ogimaa Peltier spoke with Tony for one of his stories in his project. So that's how they know each other and how we are able to speak with him today. But maybe do you want to elaborate a bit on how your community is responding to some of these things that Tony mentioned?
Well, I think thank you first of all for having me as a guest, and it's great to see everyone here. And so I want to say hello to all the audience. My community here on Manitoulin Island, Wikwemicong Territory, is we're on one of the largest freshwater island in the world, and much of the work that Tony reported on about a year and a half ago is something that we've had to respond to when we talk about our community sustenance on the fishery, the natural fishery. Much of the changes in the climate had a devastating impact on the availability of the fish species that our community relied on, and namely the whitefish that existed here in Lake Huron. And much of the human activity that has occurred around Lake Huron as a result of the major shipping that comes through the St. Lawrence Seaway, when they dump out their tanks, they inadvertently introduce the zebra mussels, which has filtered the lake so much that in places you can see down into the bottom of the lake close to 100 feet deep. And that's not natural. And because of the zebra mussels being so effective in filtering water, it's essentially removed any and all of the microorganisms that the fish species require. So we've had to we've been monitoring the fish stocks, and the whitefish levels have severely dropped over the last few years. And it's been our approach here to support the aquaculture industry, and we have one of the largest aquaculture operation in Ontario at the moment that supplies a lot of the major grocery stores in the eastern Canada. So we've had to do these types of things. We've been monitoring much of the activity along the shoreline. Many of you have reported on the water levels, the fluctuating water levels over the last number of years. And I think when we talk about climate change, one of the ones that I'm very interested in seeing how we're going to collectively respond is the Enbridge line 5 that goes on the bottom of the Mackinac Straits, because we're just a few less than 100 miles away from that, and we know that if there was any rupture to that line, that it's going to severely impact the whole ecosystem of Lake Huron and as well as Lake Michigan. So I've been keeping my ears to the ground, and at any opportunity that I need to raise the issue, and we continue to support any of those in our community that take it upon themselves to raise awareness on the importance of protecting our water and all life sources that are derived from it. So I think those are some of the things that I appreciate when reporters are coming forward and looking for stories, and they take an active interest in those types of things that will allow our universe to continue as it is, and hopefully repair some of the things that are detrimental to our sustenance and survival. So, miigwech, thank you.
Thank you. And I think, keeping with that topic of conversations and communities and keeping those going, Kimberly, I'm curious to know about your thoughts about, involving further diverse stakeholders and businesses in these conversations, because it's another level of, involvement, and you have a lot of experience with that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I would also like to share my screen. And so my name again is Kimberly Knott. Hello, everyone. I want to thank you to the Pulitzer Center and to Sandra for inviting me to participate in this very important and timely discussion. So I was the director of policy at the oldest environmental justice organization in the state of Michigan, and that was Detroiters Working for Environmental Justice. And while there, I was also the program director for the Detroit Climate Action Collaborative, which led the development of the city of Detroit's first climate action plan. So it was a huge undertaking. And I think that that actually really segues perfectly into the very brief presentation that I am now going to show. Okay, hold on. This is my first time using Canva. All right. Let me move this little box over. Okay. So this is a quote by Congressman Jim Clyburn. Environmental protection doesn't happen in a vacuum. One can't separate the environment or the impact on the environment from the impact on our families and communities. And that really fits right into what environmental justice really is. Environmental justice embraces the principles that all people and communities have a right to equal protection and equal enforcement of environmental laws and regulations. Today, zip code is still the most potent predictor of an individual's health and well-being. Individuals who physically live on the edge or live on the wrong side of the tracks are subjected to elevated environmental health threats and more than their fair share of preventable diseases. And this is a quote by Dr. Robert Bullard, who is a very well-known environmental justice activist and scholar. So this is really the face of environmental justice, and this is why our efforts were so, we included so many different sectors. So you can see really all of the impacts of environmental injustice and climate change in this particular collage of pictures. So you'll see the older gentleman who is hot, and we know that climate change deals with two weather extremities, extreme heat and extreme precipitation. The picture next to him is flooding that we are consistently confronted with because of aging infrastructure. This is particularly the case in the city of Detroit and many urban communities. The other picture is Southwest Detroit, which is actually the most polluted zip code in the entire state of Michigan. The picture below that is an office setting, which really talks about the impact that climate change has on the business sector. The young lady who has asthma and the the fact that we have a combined sewer system in the city of Detroit. And as a result of that, whenever we have increased precipitation, it is not uncommon for gallons, millions of gallons to flood over into or seep into the Detroit River. And that is untreated and partially treated sewage. And the reason that is important, not only because of health issues, but also because it impacts food security. Many people in the city of Detroit actually fish at the Detroit River. So according to the CDC, a 2008 report in Michigan, African Americans were 3.4 times as likely to die from asthma than white Americans. And the NAACP and the Clean Air Task Force developed a report called Fumes Across the Fence Line. And they found that African American children in Southeast Michigan suffer 2,400 asthma attacks annually, and that's caused by oil and gas pollution in the air. And in addition to that, they miss over 1,700 days of school. So there are so many co-benefits to addressing environmental injustice. So we have, the economics, but most importantly, we have public health, and oftentimes public health is sacrificed for economics. The triple bottom line has not fully been enforced. So this is the sectors, various sectors that we engage during our climate action plan. You will see at the top left-hand corner, the Hip Hop Caucus, and we took this group on an environmental justice tour. The art picture was really interesting. We partnered with Detroit Public Schools and the Detroit Institute of Art to teach the children about climate change, and their art projects were on exhibit at the DIA for quite some time. In the corner, far right, you will see community leaders. We hosted Gina McCarthy, who is now a part of the Biden administration. Below is our youth climate. So we had a series of youth climates that we had, and those are children from the Detroit Public Schools. The middle picture are business leaders. We convened a business summit. And we had business vendors as well. There's another picture in the far left of, showing the summit at Wayne State University. Then the last two pictures are community meetings that we held. And so we developed a number of different resources to reach out to these various sectors that we actually touched. And those resources were, we did the climate action plan. Of course, that was the major document that we created, but we also did the city of Detroit's first greenhouse gas inventory. We did the Detroit climatology study, a Detroit economic analysis, a small business sustainability toolkit, and Detroit's vulnerability report. So that is how we actively engaged various sectors of the community. And what we had to do, being a small environmental justice organization, is to really build the case for why a climate action plan was needed when the city of Detroit was actually going through a bankruptcy. And so all of these documents really sold the city and other key stakeholders on the reason that they should be involved in planning this comprehensive document.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. And I think, what you've shared with us just reminds me about how complex these issues are. You have everything from environmental injustice to infrastructure issues to, economic considerations. And, I'm curious from, the journalists here, how do you begin to share that information in a way that, your readers, your listeners, your watchers understand? Maybe I'll start with Tony this time, if that's okay with you, not to put you on the spot first, but.
No, I think that for journalists, we really it's as much about the information and, certainly all of these, whether it's environmental justice, climate change issues, all of that has very severe impacts. And I think that people understand the importance, but you really have to put a face on it. And so that's what we really were given the opportunity to do with the Pulitzer Center grant, was to go to these communities and, talk to the third generation ice fisherman who was unsure or not if, his children would be able to do that same thing. Coming in the next generation, or if they would be able to, continue that tradition, or people in, Lake Erie who were very paranoid about their water quality there, and for good reason, because this had followed the Toledo water crisis. Or for, folks along, Lake Huron who had seen such crazy fluctuations in lake levels, which was disrupting, places. I mean, you have 30 of the 35,000 islands in the Great Lakes are in Lake Huron. I mean, boating, fishing, all of that is a way of life that is dramatically changing. And it's the same thing with environmental justice too. And I think that another way that you really drive home these issues too is looking at the full history. Ogimaa Peltier brought up line 5, and it was really startling to me to understand that, we didn't really even understand, the way that the Straits of Mackinac, which connects Lake Michigan and Lake Huron together, that is a flow that alternates back and forth between the lakes. We didn't really even understand the way that those currents worked when that line was built, carrying all different types of materials back and forth. And so it was only in the past decade that we understood that it was about 2.5, 3 days that flow alternates. So looking at the history to understand why certain things may have been a mistake, and what lessons can be learned, from that history.
Thank you so much, Tony. Sandra or Kari, do you want to jump in or add anything?
I think, Tony nailed it, saying on one hand, putting a face on the stories and just helping people understand the real life impacts of, both the problems and possible solutions. And I think also letting people know, just making it clear through our explanation and our stories that it's not a trade-off, both between business and environment and public health, and between different communities, like say, for example, with coal-fired power being a major public health issue that disproportionately affects a lot of people of color and low-income people in urban areas. And then you have, this sort of culture war where people who work in coal mines and coal communities, people who work at those actual coal-fired power plants who usually don't live in the communities, they feel like they're under attack, and their well-being is at risk if we close down these coal-fired power plants and transition to clean energy, which is better for everyone, including the people especially affected by the impacts of coal. But it doesn't really need to be a trade-off. There's a lot of focus on the concept of a just transition. It's not necessarily easy, but how do you provide alternate economic sustenance and new jobs and forms of even reparations from the companies and interests that have benefited from coal for all that time? How does that get funneled back to make a transition where no one necessarily needs to suffer? So I think just, and numbers, putting numbers, like putting the numbers, letting people know the actual documented economic value of the sport fishery in the Great Lakes and recreation in the Great Lakes. And so when you do things that may cost taxpayer money to protect that resource, you're also getting that economic benefit that, is actually much greater. And then there's the things you can't even put numbers on, like the value of being able to fish in a river in an urban community, or for Indigenous people, that might not have as measurable of an economic value, but it has an immeasurable value for that family and that community. So also through storytelling, we can make those things clear. And yeah, there are all different ways to do it.
Sandra, I think you're still muted.
I hit the button, not enough. Okay, can you hear me okay? Okay, so I think, I don't mean to sound gleeful about this at all, because we are certainly dealing with, everything from questions of equity in communities to global science and everything in between here. But I also think the Great Lakes are a really good mechanism, if you will, to bring more people into conversations about climate change and about the complexity of the system, but also our connectedness across the region. And so what we try to do in the show, we kind of have it easy compared to some other journalistic projects, right? I mean, people in the region, I didn't look at where everybody was watching from, but anybody in the region knows how special the Great Lakes are. People who have visited know how special the Great Lakes are. If you are watching this and you have not visited the Great Lakes, please come see them, because one of my favorite things is to find people who are visiting for the first time. I've been on a couple journalistic workshops where, when you see those lakes for the first time and they realize the majesty, the size, the power, the history, the cultures, the variety of communities, the diversity of people, the stories, the industries. We try to do that in our show, but also not talk about it too much, because it's totally overwhelming when you think, how am I going to get all of that into 25 minutes once a month? In addition to the story, we're lucky to have the website because we can bring in more stories. And so I do think, I'm really, even though my head's kind of exploding, especially since the new administration took office and you've seen a lot more people in different industries and levels of government saying the words climate change for a change in some ways, my head is sometimes exploding at the number of webinars I'm seeing, or people who are having more public conversations. And then I always just bring it back around to really bite size, for lack of a better word, on what can we put in our show? How can we reach that viewer with the show where, our audience knows the Great Lakes. A lot of people have generations of stories of their own, of their families, of, whether they're coming in from a deep-seated tradition and way of life and economy, or they're tourists. We have the opportunity to bring them into Great Lakes Now through the name alone. Let's show them the lakes, and also without being too simplistic or alarmist, how can we reach them with these stories? And I think, we are learning to do that every day. We're a new show. We'll hit our 2 years in April. And so, how can we connect with people who can help us tell that story? Every time I'm on a webinar like this, I hope to reconnect with a lot of you afterwards and work on that, whether it's through the show or engagement or web content. And then, we're in for a long haul, but I am really happy to see more attention being paid to our region, because I think the most dramatic numbers and elements of climate change evidence have been along the ocean coasts. And while we don't have as straight a formula here in the Great Lakes, we certainly have plenty to talk about and plenty to show. And, certainly stories everybody has told of the examples. That's something that people in this region can identify with. And then we help them take the next step for more knowledge.
Thank you, Sandra. And I think that, that is a great transition into some of our audience questions, which we are getting some through the Q&A. So please continue sharing them. But, some folks, David in particular, he says he's learning a lot about important mitigation and resilience stories and strategies. I wonder if any of the panelists might comment on stories about post-carbon transition priorities and efforts unique to the Great Lakes region. What are the most important contributions our region can or should play in moving towards carbon neutrality? What role can local communities play in leading these efforts? So a big question from David, but it reminded me of, I thought that they were connected, I guess, because you're talking about breaking down these huge issues, which is, for anyone who lives in the Great Lakes region, it is part of your whole life. So I was wondering if just anyone has any stories about priorities or efforts. Kari, I saw you unmuted.
Sorry.
So.
Yeah, I have a couple quick thoughts. They're not necessarily unique to the Great Lakes region, but things that are big in the Great Lakes region. it is exciting how this transition is happening, even in places, red states and places that you don't think of necessarily as on the forefront of moving away from carbon. So just two quick examples. In places like Chicago, a lot of other cities, there's really vibrant and detailed community-led efforts to plan for what should replace fossil fuel-related old industries and structures. So, say sites of coal plants that are closed on the southeast side of Chicago, there's a lot of amazing community activism around turning it from a sort of dumping ground and sacrifice zone that was once the steel industry, and petroleum coke is stored there, and all kinds of other heavy industry. And the communities, all carbon intensive, the communities come up with a lot of very detailed plans for the types of resilient and locally beneficial and green things they'd like to see as a replacement. At the site of the two coal plants closed right in the limits of Chicago. And there's very detailed plans that have put out by community collaborations for those sites, including a communal kitchen or a community kitchen where people who have food vending trucks can make their food. So, a very local economic development strategy with a low impact and carbon footprint. And then in terms of, larger scale renewable energy, people outside the Midwest might not be aware, well, this obviously happens in places other than the Midwest too, but people who aren't in agricultural communities, even people in agricultural communities might not know just how beneficial lease payments from wind and solar farms can be, and how that can be a huge benefit for the tax base and for individual landowners. So, that's something that's huge in the Great Lakes. And yeah.
Thank you, Kari. Kimberly, do you have something to share, or?
Well, there are a few things that have happened since the launch of our Detroit Climate Action Plan. The City of Detroit established an Office of Sustainability. They developed a sustainability action agenda and are actually now working on another part of dealing with climate change. One of the things that I did was lead a policy group, and we led the passage of the City of Detroit greenhouse gas ordinance. And as a result of that, and that ordinance passed with no opposition, which indeed is a miracle. And so as a result of that, it will allow the City of Detroit to conduct regular greenhouse gas inventories. And so the City of Detroit is really at the beginning of addressing climate change, but are really moving aggressively towards that particular step. And last but not least, my company has been rebranded Future Insight Consulting. And the reason I did that is because when I was leading the development of the Climate Action Plan, I recognized the role that that businesses played. And it was a very thin line that we decided to cross. And that was to invite businesses to our table. And we believe that if they were part of the problem, they should also be part of the solution. And so my company now looks at working with corporate leaders who may be interested in working in environmental justice communities, or in addressing certain environmental issues within the communities in which they're located. So it's been fulfilling. It's rather new, and I'm really looking forward to future conversations with business leaders and really continuing those relationships that were built before.
Thank you, Kimberly. And this is kind of related to another question that's come in from Samuel, who was wondering what are some things that the average citizen can do. And, I think that anyone who is doing this work, they're above average, because I feel like a lot of people don't even know what's going on. But it reminded me, Ogimaa Peltier, of in a story I read about the water walks. And this is not something I think that every person would be able to do, but I think it's just a good story or example of a way people can get more connected to what's going on in their part of the world. And I was wondering if you could share more about that. I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, the water walks themselves were it come out of the a challenge within one of our ceremonial lodges, and it was a challenge to the women of the lodge because they are gifted with that gift of bringing children into this world through water. So it's the women's responsibility to care for water, and the challenge to them was that the water needs to be protected. Somebody needs to do something. And one of our grandmothers, Josephine Mendaman, who had passed away 2 years ago now, she set out roughly about 15 years ago and wanted to raise awareness about the need for human beings and everyone to pitch in to begin protecting the water sources regardless of where they were. And her first journey was around the whole of Lake Superior. So she continued these types of walks with very minimal financial support. She was sleeping at wherever she was welcomed in. They were providing food, and ultimately she went around every single Great Lake. She completed our traditional migratory route from the East Coast. She went from Quebec, the coast of Quebec, and all the way back to Duluth, Minnesota. And then she did it Duluth back to the East Coast. And through some of the other people that have come on to this in helping her raise awareness, they've also done most of the major rivers in North America. And it's through her efforts where ultimately I think they calculated where she walked 17,000 kilometers or whatever it is, 10,000 miles. And she went through hundreds of pairs of shoes. So she was, that was one of the donations that were coming in from the corporate people, was providing her with the walking shoes that she liked. And it's grown to a movement that many communities, First Nation communities, Indigenous communities throughout the Great Lakes area are now taking upon themselves to raise awareness to their own local bodies of water. And in fact, it's spreading out into the Western provinces and into the United States now, where people and women are leading the charge and raising that awareness. So I think it's her challenge was just that. She didn't have any support, but she was guided by her spirit, and her motto was just do it. She just needs to do it, and people followed her. And I think that's one of the things that we're very proud of. And she's been mentoring many other individuals, and including her great niece, who is now the Chief Water Commissioner of the Anishinaabe Nation, and has gone on to make presentations on the global scale and taking those same messages that we as human beings need to protect water at all costs. And I think those are the types of movements when we're looking for people, or they're looking for examples on how to step forward, that they just need to just do it and take that first step, and people will come along and help them out with whatever supports that they need.
Thank you so much. And I'm seeing in the Q&A or the chat that Shannon on Superior walked with Josephine, and says, tell everyone to sing to the water. So thank you so much for sharing that. And it's great to hear that, others are picking up, like you said, on this movement that others have started, and, continuing to share the importance of water. And I'm wondering if any other panelists have come across, steps people are taking to better understand or, protect the water near them.
Well, Holly, I wanted to say something to address the person who asked the question in terms of what can they do. One of the things that we did is we developed the Detroit Climate Ambassador Program. And that was a program that was really geared towards members of the community, residents of the community. And they were able to talk about issues that were important to them. We would meet once a month, and we had, we had different people at different times, but it was pretty good. We had a pretty good showing of people and a pretty good representation of people who were interested in addressing climate change. So establishing a climate ambassador program may be a good way to involve residents also, and which can focus on precipitation as well as extreme heat. Another thing you can do, I really like what Duke talked about, was we also hosted an environmental justice tour. And there's nothing like hosting a tour for key decision makers. So I would do it for business leaders and government representatives, because I wanted them to see the face of pollution. And it's important, if you decide to do that, to really talk to the people who are being impacted by pollution, and not to try and do not to try and engage them, but also talk to them and actively involve them in the process.
Thank you. Kari, were you going to add something?
Yeah, on the issue of reducing carbon footprint, also on the energy front, so much of reducing our overall carbon footprint is the clean energy transition. And that is really depends so much on what local utilities are doing, and state laws that have to do with where we get our energy utility policy, and the state regulatory commissions or utility public service commissions decisions that they make, which is all stuff that is so wonky and complicated. It's almost impossible for a regular person to just access it and really have a voice in those proceedings. Luckily, there are consumer groups and a lot of community groups that really do extremely hard work keeping on top of these processes and making it a little bit easier for citizens to participate and make their voices heard. So that is a really important way that we can reduce our carbon output overall, by just all these seemingly mundane but really important state law and utility policy rate case procedures that are always going on.
Thank you. And we're starting to get more questions in the Q&A, so do keep them coming. And one question from Nicole that I think connects well with what Kimberly was saying about the ambassadors program and connecting people who, don't necessarily experience these effects of climate change on a regular basis. I'm curious to hear from the journalists too about how you communicate these issues to people who may not experience them. I think that there is a level of understanding from people who may read these stories, and they live this reality. But how do you communicate this to individuals who don't?
We've largely done it through, our cameras, taking people there and letting people tell their stories. So we did a piece in our November show about, again, we've hit the water level. We've addressed that in several different kinds of ways. One way was from the idea of waterfront property, not just wanting people to be sympathetic with people who own waterfront property necessarily, but to hear from the people that do, and what do you do, really being in their shoes, and from the perspective of those in that community, the leaders in that community, what policies can they put in? Is it a state issue? Is it a local issue? Is it an international issue? Because the Great Lakes are international. And then we always bring in the scientists as well. And we ended that segment with scientists talking about what happens when you harden a shoreline, what that does to the natural environment in another place. And so trying to keep on that message of how communities of the Great Lakes are connected, how we do have a sense of shared stewardship, or can we build that, but also honestly bringing a variety of viewpoints. Because I think, in the media, if we come out too heavy with a very, very pro-environmentalist, and again, not that, this is anybody's particular opinion, but to present the other points of view, sometimes just by the nature of acknowledging someone's point of view, they open their eyes to the other side as well. And so we do try to take a gentle approach. We don't do arguments on our show, or we try to, be respectful of a variety of viewpoints. And in that segment alone, when I saw it, it really struck me of being, we were located in a boat at one point. We took the viewers along, the cameras, went up and down. You could get a little seasick if you watched it. We followed a reporter who was trying to do her story for Bridge, Michigan about that element. And then we met the real people involved at a community level. And so to me, that just kind of makes these really big issues where, people want numbers and measurement, but when you can put it in perspective of what someone's experiencing in their everyday life, that's one way I think that helps audiences, but I don't know, maybe I just made that up. Yeah.
No, thank you. Or Tony, were you going to say something?
Yeah, no, just briefly, and I think that Kimberly talked about this a little bit too, but climate change, not unlike this pandemic, has really just kind of laid bare some of the great inequities that we've seen. It's not evenly distributed, and so taking people to the worst hit places, not just in the Great Lakes High Stakes series, but also just through other of my reporting. I mean, looking at, what does more precipitation mean to communities that typically see flooding? We're seeing a lot of, low income communities of color that are hit hardest by this. And, I think it's really important to put things into context to show folks who might need, help the most. And also to really, I guess, take people there and it basically show people, as I've tried to do just with the south side of Chicago, the basement flooding that happens year in, year out, where people are literally, it sounds disgusting, but cleaning maggots out of their basement because the infrastructure is so old, it's not built to handle the kind of rainstorms that we're seeing now, which causes our sewer systems to kind of overflow and to back up into basements. And so maybe when we're discussing some of these, big infrastructure plans, maybe that's where we start, but it starts by telling people and putting those kind of issues into context.
One of the things that we did with our Detroit Climate Ambassador program is we went to the most flood-prone area in the city of Detroit, and we assembled a team of residents and we built several rain gardens in that particular area. And the residents were so happy and so excited, and they actually helped us. But before we did that, we actually had a session and talked about the impact of climate change, and particularly extreme precipitation, and how not only was it going to rain more frequently, but the precipitation was going to become more intense. And so there are so many opportunities to engage residents in various sectors of the community. And I will also say to those who are interested in engaging the community, is really get to know your local journalists, those who reporters who are interested in the issues around the environment and the issues that you've been fighting for and that you care about. And Sandra was a great partner. She interviewed me so many times about what we were doing with the Detroit Climate Action Plan. And she actually was the co-host of a film that I co-produced at the African American Museum. We had a green carpet event, and it was wonderful, sold out event, and she did an excellent job. And it was great to just have that type of support from just a really cool media personality.
That's a lot to live up to, Kimberly. That was at my previous job at WDET at Public Radio. But that it kind of gets into coming at climate change and community resiliency from another point of view. I mean, I was at radio to cover the bankruptcy in 2014 originally, and then spent another few years looking at the city, what happened next with the city. And so it wasn't just the numbers on the spreadsheet. I was able to bring in, this is a city that has now positioned its balance sheet for the future, for better or for worse. This is way outside the scope of today, but it was also a way to look at other issues we care about, which was, how is the city positioned with infrastructure, with citizen action, with embracing these efforts that we could put under that lens. Sorry, my dog's climbing in here. That we could put under that lens. Again, bringing people in through one story, getting them to understand some of the issues, that they may not have expected to encounter, in that realm.
Yeah, and I think Sandra, you don't need to be so modest, because I think, a lot of listeners today are really curious about, journalists, what knowledge you have about the issues in their own communities. And we do have one question that this individual shares, that the city of Joliet, which is outside of Chicago, Illinois, determined that their current water source will not supply their needs in the very near future, and that they have contracted with Chicago to supply Lake Michigan water. So he asks, is the loss of well and aquifer water a growing issue for communities that surround the Great Lakes? And what are the risks for the lakes if demand increases? So, maybe you might not live right on the shore, to be able to see the lake from your house, but could anyone speak to, individuals who might live on communities further inland? How are they going to be affected?
Yeah, no, I can chime in on this. My colleagues at the Tribune actually did something on this, and it's pretty outstanding. And when you think about it, I mean, the third largest city in the state of Illinois is going to be without a source of water by 2030. And so I think that the first question that I had when I heard about this was, how did this happen? And I think that, sustainability is going to be a big thing. I've seen archival clips for the city of Joliet that go back to uh, the 60s, where it says that water use, they saw declines in this aquifer, which stretch all the way from northern Illinois to southern Wisconsin. And so when you think about that, it's there's enough groundwater in all of the great underneath all of the Great Lakes watershed to fill up an entire Lake Michigan. But the question is, how are we using that? Are we using it sustainably? Because it's no different than Joliet hooking onto Chicago's water for Lake Michigan. Peter Aneen actually wrote a book, The Great Lakes Water Wars, on this. When you're talking about more and more cities, latching on to the Great Lakes, he called it death by 1,000 straws. Which is, when you add on a bunch of different intakes, what is kind of that sustainable limit? I mean, we saw all-time low water levels for Lake Michigan and Huron in 2013, and we had this incredible resurgence, nearly 6 feet in less than 7 years. But I think that we have to look at the science to say, well, what can we support? And I think that is one of those history lessons, as I mentioned, looking back, in the 60s, when the city of Joliet and many of the other communities were on this aquifer, what was the sustainable limit then? And how much could we have established something regional to say, we need to mitigate our water use or find other alternative sources? For that particular case, I will say Aurora, Illinois did something interesting in response 30 years ago. They actually limited the amount of groundwater on that same aquifer that they were using and used river water to say, well, we're going to cut our water sources in half. So that's the kind of innovation that I think is necessary going forward, fully understanding an issue and then taking decisive action.
Thank you so much, Tony. Any other, don't want to cut anyone off if they have anything to add. There's another question about, and if this is getting into another issue, or you don't have enough background on this, we can certainly move on. But someone was asking about climate refugees and about how the Great Lakes region will be the most suitable by around 2070, which seems like so far in the future, but it's 2021. So I was wondering if anyone has any insight about that, or has anyone already kind of seen any of those migration patterns?
So if I can just, shameless self-promotion, we have a story on our website from 2 weeks ago, but it was published by Circle of Blue. Keith Schneider's the senior editor there, and he had a piece about this very issue, looking at what, might that happen? What would it mean? Are we going to see that? I actually talked to the Urban Institute a couple of weeks ago. They had a report from 2018 that looked at population patterns, and they're not quite ready to make real bold predictions. We do see more migration around the Great Lakes area. So, we like to hear, we don't like to hear, we often hear about population leaving the Rust Belt now. And it's not entirely true. There's migration within it. There is some out migration to, the states you would expect, but I have thoughts that are probably not well educated on whether that's a thing. I know people are talking about it. I know, water has been discussed in those terms. It was, the subject of a James Bond movie as one of the things that the bad guys were protecting and hoarding. So it's not like this is a totally new idea. I think it's new to the Great Lakes because, in the last century, the region as an identity hasn't been the same as, a Florida or an Arizona around the country. So I think that's kind of one that I'm sitting back with some popcorn for, the next 50 years.
Well, I think we're definitely have experienced it before. I remember Hurricane Katrina and how many people from New Orleans were sent to Michigan. And I remember my friends and I just kind of riding around trying to find people that we could help. And we actually were able to get some food donated to a particular hotel where they were staying. But I think we're going to see more and more of that. And so these issues are complicated by the fact that most of the people who are experiencing these extreme events, as has already been stated, are low income and communities of color. And I think that those are the people that will typically become the climate refugees. And we may not recognize it yet, but I would not be surprised if I'm sure there are people who came up here from New Orleans who never went home. So they were displaced. And you look at California and what's going on out there in different places throughout the country and throughout the world. So I do not think that the issue of climate refugees is, I think it's going to become more and more of an issue for us to address.
Ogimaa, Peltier.
So I'll raise the question too, because I do want to hear the answer. Will the migration be forced, or like to what extent is it voluntary or involuntary? Is it the, people who can work remotely do so and move up to northern Minnesota, as I see the comment there, or is it a Katrina situation where people are leaving really damaged areas? Get out your crystal balls. I'd like to hear from everybody.
Well, I think I can chime in here a little bit too. One of the stories that I had heard from our knowledge keepers, and where it's been prophesized going back before my lifetime, where they were having these discussions and realizing that the water was going to be the most important commodity in the future. And they had already had those talks to say that it was going to be more important, and it's going to cost more than oil. And we're already seeing that now, where a barrel of oil isn't worth as much as it was 5 years ago, but the bottle of water is $5 now when you walk into the convenience store. So these are some of the things that our people have continued to think about, and are very much aware that where we live, we have the largest source of fresh water here in this continent, and I think the predictions that are from the question, that yes, it's going to be a place that people are going to flock to, and it's going to be one that we're already seeing municipalities, towns, and cities having those discussions on where they're going to get water for their people. So it is the most important resource that we collectively have to protect.
Tony, thank you, Ogimaa, Peltier. I think that, is also a good response to Sandra's question about, what we think is going to happen. And we might not know, but a lot of what we've heard and what we read seems to point to it's inevitable, which is not a very positive thing to look at. But I'm curious. We've talked already a little bit about this, but other solutions people have come into or heard about that you think might be a way to, mitigate this. Or you can also, I mean, I do try and keep things positive, but, if there are things that you found in your research that you want people to know, I've certainly learned a lot already just being here about, how much fresh water is in the Great Lakes. And, I grew up in Illinois, like these are things that I should know. So really it's just open to anyone, but what else do you think listeners should know about this issue, or what else can they do about this issue?
I think if I could just chime in quickly, one of the most profound things that I think I came across was talking to a township supervisor along a town in Lake Erie, or I mean not Lake Erie, Lake Huron, off the Upper Peninsula, and they were dealing with these extreme fluctuations in water level that I mentioned, and he said that one of the words that or terms that just killed him was adaptive management. He says that those are two polar opposites. Management is about control, and adaptation is about going with the flow, I guess, if you want to put it that way. Just adapting and letting go of control, and basically, pretty much that's all they could do in that instance was, looking at what options were within their toolbox to handle this level of lake level fluctuation, and how much they really just had to simply retreat in other areas. And I think that that's really the story of climate change in a nutshell, is how much is within our ability to control and how much do we have to adapt to it. And one of the biggest things that I think is within our control was in the Lake Erie region was, our contribution to harmful algal blooms, 90% of which was coming from these big factory farms, this agricultural runoff from these, they call them CAFOs. And so looking at, agriculture, how can that be regulated? How can, how are we, fertilizing our fields and such like that? Obviously that being the catalyst for these big bacteria outbreaks that are rendering some folks without water, and really, causing many other problems with the dead zone in the central basin of Lake Erie as well. So looking at our contribution and what is within that scope, I think will be big.
Thank you, Tony. It's just interesting, hearing about the difference between individual and government or corporate action. And it reminds me about, I've read just things from, pieces you've all been involved in about, steps people are taking on the legal front, like Ogimaa Peltier trying to reestablish claim over certain islands, or Kimberly, pushing for the climate action plans that you've established in Detroit. And so I'm just wondering if anyone might want to or can elaborate about, the importance of not only having that individual action, trying to reduce your carbon footprint, like we've talked about, but also setting up these, codified, I guess, legal barriers. Not, that's okay too, but I'm just, I'm curious about, I don't know, I feel like a lot of responsibility is put on individual action, but there are these larger conversations that are happening too.
Well, I can talk a little bit, I guess. I can't take any responsibility for it, but the province of Ontario embarked on a bold plan, a green energy plan, which they called. And one of the things that used to happen quite frequently here in Ontario was we would be subject to smog advisories almost every day for most times during the summer. And in the last 10 years, we haven't had any smog days, any smog advisories. And what it could be attributed to was they made a push to establish a green energy program where they supported large industrial wind turbine development. They supported solar energy, and they reduced the amount of coal-fired electrical generating plants. So that bold plan that they initiated, it's still not necessarily popular. However, I think when we look at the science and behind it, it's definitely worked. And we don't have any of these smog advisories anymore. And I think that's the type of approaches that when we're looking at policy type approaches, those types of conversations have to be had with the elected officials, and as well, and bring everyone into the same room, and just be bold about it, to have plans that are going to address the issues that need to get resolved. And I think that's probably a perfect example when Tony talks about adaptive management. That's exactly what it was. They've had to adapt, and and luckily and fortunately that they had a positive result. And I think these are some of the things that when we're looking at solutions, shoreline erosion, these are definitely issues that we need to, everybody has to be responsible for. We do, the waters themselves require those buffer zones from human activity in order for it to function as it needs to. We can't control it. It's going to find its way in anywhere, and I think it does wreak havoc when it wants to. So we can't play God in a lot of respects, Ben. I think we just have to come to the realization that we need to respect those types of forces and be adaptive to where it's required. So thank you.
Thank you.
I think collaboration is key. You have to be willing to engage people use different strategies for engagement. So one strategy may be one-on-one meetings to let them know who else is at the table, who else you're planning to bring at the table, so that you're able to also build that trust and level of comfort, but also, larger meetings. So one of the things that we did is we brought all of these issue experts together, public health and solid waste and businesses and institutions and parks and public space and water infrastructure folks. And we had them vet each other's plans. So we put them in a room, we made the presentation fun, but when those different groups made their presentation, and these particular groups are the ones who actually wrote the climate action plan, they were able to hear from people outside of their profession about if their plan made sense. They were asked questions that they had to respond to. And I think that those are the type of discussions that we need to have, and making sure that certainly our elected officials and government representatives are in the room. Because if you're not in the room, you're on the menu. And too many of our communities have been on the menu.
We are getting close to our time. So I think, one of my final questions I wanted to ask, which is kind of a big one, I think I want to go ahead and pose that, but I wanted to, hopefully leave some of the young journalists or young organizers watching this with some hope moving forward. So if, speaking from your own experience and area of expertise, I was wondering if you could offer any advice to someone watching today, maybe something that, you want to look more into, or, you haven't had a chance to dig deeper on yet, but maybe is an issue, or, a bit of advice you could pass down. It's a big question, sorry. just trying to, leave us with some hope.
Yeah, I think, one of the keys is what, if I mean, you have to define the problem to give a solution, but not to be, I mean, and the problem is still something we are figuring out in some ways, right? Our region is a little bit newer to it than some other parts of the country or even the world. And so, but also like what Kimberly has said really struck me too about not just collaboration as we talk about it in media, which is the whole reason we're here, right? Is the project that we did was media collaboration. But on the media side, and I think this applies to people in other disciplines and other industries as well, is that, finding people to talk to that and have meetings with and work on projects with, or come to forums like this, speak on panels that you don't, normally think of. From the media side, we're doing watch parties with an aquarium, on the, with a group that works on Belle Isle. And so, that's not something that I would have thought a year ago, even that, like, why are we doing a watch party with an aquarium once a month? Except because they've got an audience that we don't have. We reach a different place. And so really being willing to get a little bit out of your comfort zone and your own echo chamber, dare I use that phrase, and whether it's crossing a community line or a layer of government or an industry, or even just your type of media, going from TV to print to radio back and forth. I think we all, kind of, and I mean, maybe this is bigger than climate change even, or maybe I'm just rambling, but being willing to take a little bit of risk for yourself in being willing to come out, talk about things and ask questions, because we don't all have the answers, but by raising the questions, we'll work towards all of that together. So hopefully that made a little bit of sense. And I am trying to be a little positive for you too, Holly.
It's not, not a requirement, but just trying to think of some nice thoughts this Tuesday evening. Kari?
Yeah, I think just to be inspired. I mean, it's a really hard business and a hard job, so it's going to be hard for sure. So, just to be inspired and just let yourself, be energized continually from getting to know and learn and help share the stories of like the work going on in Detroit, and hearing about Josephine walking all those miles. And I saw a comment about the 10across.com, which sounds really cool. Like just it's just so amazing to learn about these issues and meet people doing this kind of work, and, being the epitome of resilience. So hopefully that will keep you going as a journalist when the times are really tough.
I mean, just to kind of, echo a little bit of what was already said. I think that we're called media for a reason. I mean, we're essentially a medium for the stories of the communities that we're telling. It's not really our stories that we're telling. And so being willing to listen to these communities, and understanding that they'll know these issues more than you ever will. So just having that patience to listen and being able to convey their story as best you can. And then the only other thing I would say is to try and take your readers with you. I grew up in the Detroit area too, in Southfield, and had never been to the Upper Peninsula. I'm a bad Michigander, until this story series. So being able to write for folks who were like myself, who may not be able to go to some of these places, and to introduce them to these places and to these issues that they might not understand fully well, just breaking it down, because I know that we're communicating these really complex, kind of scientific processes, and trying to just distill them for everyone, because it does matter in every community. Climate change really affects every facet of modern life. It's just finding that way that really touches your reader, but then taking your reader with you to the places that might be the most acutely affected.
Thanks, Tony. Ogimaa, Peltier, or Kimberly, anything you want the audience to know?
I guess if we're talking about inspiring young reporters, one of the things that I have a pet peeve, because I'm an elected official also, and I do get some calls from some certain reporters, and they're only wish is to report on some of the negative aspects of life. And I think as a reporter, you're gonna find more appreciation for the people that you're wishing to report on if you're looking for the positive stories, or these larger type of discussions that are going to morph into policy directives from governments. And I think that's where you're going to feel that inspiration, that there more needs to be told. You're going to hear more stories. You're going to get more engagement from people that way, just because of the fact that not everybody likes to hear about opiate crisis as an example. Like we understand it's happening, but I think people want to hear about the high school graduate that's gone on to do bigger and better things. So I think that's where my message to a young reporter is: look for the positivity in what you wish to report on.
Thank you. That's definitely good advice. Finally, last but certainly not least, Kimberly, anything to add?
Well, I would just say, I remember what my mother told me. And one of the things that she would say is that a winner never quits and a quitter never wins. And the best way to beat failure is a try. And so it's important to recognize that you have the ability to help solve the problems that you're concerned about. It doesn't mean that you solve them by yourself, but it does mean that you find other people who are like-minded, who are itching for a solution, and start a group. It's not hard at all. You don't have to fill out any paperwork. You just can, just convene people. And there's so much meaning and fulfillment in doing that. And I would just say, that when the tough gets going, because it will, I remember, even when we hardly had any money to continue this effort of developing a huge climate action plan that took us 6 years to complete, we never quit. We kept going. And so that is my word of encouragement for everyone on this call, is to keep going and not quit. We want to build resilient communities, but one of the ways that you build resilient communities is that you have to find some resilience, because it takes resilience to do the type of work that we're doing, and to do it effectively and to enjoy it.
Thank you so much, everyone, for those final thoughts. I think just speaking for myself, I've learned a lot about, what's going on and, some possible solutions. So just thank you again for today's conversation. And for everyone watching, this will be online at pulitzercenter.org in the coming days. So if you want to check it out again or share it with others within your network, please feel free. I wanted to also say thanks to my colleagues at the Pulitzer Center, especially Kayla Edwards, who was the producer for this session. And we, of course, appreciate all of you in our audience for joining us today. And for those of you who are able, the Pulitzer Center is a nonprofit organization, so we depend on donor support. Please donate today and become a Pulitzer Center champion. We also have some upcoming events, some related to climate change, others not. For example, tomorrow we'll be joined by Nicole Hannah-Jones, the Pulitzer Prize winning creator of the 1619 Project. And she'll join students from Howard University School of Law and the University of Miami School of Law to talk about the 1619 Project Law School Initiative, specifically with a focus on legal and political history. So registration's still open. Do check that out, and you can see that event and other events at pulitzercenter.org/events. Finally, we would love it if you could keep your window open for a few moments to take a brief survey after we officially end today's session. And once again, just thank you for being with us today. We'll hope you join us again soon. Bye.